There was once a young man who you might be tempted to say led a charmed life. He had everything you could ever hope for. He had a wonderful marriage, a loving family, a career at which he was not only good at, but recognized for. Wealth and riches were his, and yet he was not happy. There was something that ate away deep within him, and the source of his discontent was an obsession about the nature of truth. And the young man would spend many, many hours, days, weeks, pondering on the question of truth. You see, he wanted to live in truth, always to live in truth. And so he thought. And then he decided, well, if I am to live in truth, then I must think always in truth. But you see, there is a problem. If I am to think in truth, then I must always speak truth. I must always act in truth. And, well, as we know, sometimes that is not so easy. But then he began to ponder the world around him and realized, as the saying goes, no man is an island. If he was to live in truth, then he needed to be able to recognize truth around him as well. And so he realized, well, if I am to live in truth, to think, to speak, to act in truth, then I must be able to hear truth as well, or at least be able to know when people are not speaking the truth. Well, this never-ending, turbulent process of thoughts began to drive him quite distracted. His poor wife was constantly bombarded by philosophical questions or sudden eureka moments from her husband, until eventually, driven to distraction by his own inability to solve this dilemma, he turned to his wife and he said, I need to know truth. Well, she said, what is it this time? No, my love, you misunderstand. I need to know truth. Oh, well then, she said. Well, I suppose you had better go and find it. Well, that was it. Of course. As soon as she said it, it seemed obvious. He needed to go on a quest, an adventure, an expedition. He needed to go in search of truth. And so he made his preparations. He packed a small bag, had all of his worldly possessions transferred into the name of his wife, and then he set out on the long and dusty road, a beggar after truth. And he searched for days, weeks, months. He climbed mountains down the other side. He went into great, vast cities and searched small villages, even searching out tiny little dwellings in the middle of nowhere. But you see, the problem was he didn't really know what he was looking for. But he believed. He believed that when he found truth, he would recognize it. And so he set out across the wide open seas. He traveled deserts, wastelands, forests and meadows. And then he climbed a mountain where he found a cave. A very small cave entrance where there was a slight wisp of smoke coming from the entrance. And as he peered inside, he could see, sat beside a small fire, was an old woman. And I mean, she was old, ancient, time-worn, a dusty, ancient old woman. only a single tooth in her mouth. Her hair, what was left of it, white, patchy, bedraggled, tumbling down over the side of her face. Her face, the skin on her face, dry, like old parchment, cracked, wrinkled, and stretched so tightly over her brow ridge and her nose, her jaw, that her face looked almost skeletal. And the man stared at this old woman, really unsure what to think of her. And as he looked, she raised a crooked hand, cramped with age, and she beckoned to him. And then she spoke. "Come," she said. "You have travelled a long way. Come rest your bones." Her voice did not match her appearance. Her voice was deep, lyrical, soothing. And the moment he heard that voice, the young man's hackles rose on his neck. He had found her. He had found truth. And for a year and a day he stayed with her, learned everything he could from her. And as the weeks went past, he began to think, yes, I am starting to know truth better. He would ask her endless questions. She, in her turn, would ask him questions. He searched through manuscripts, read from books, meditated. And by the time that year and a day had passed, he stood at the entrance to her cave once more, but this time preparing to leave, and this time believing that finally he knew truth. But before he left, he turned to that ancient old woman again, and he said, "Oh, my Lady Truth, you have taught me so much. Is there anything I can do for you in exchange?" And old Lady Truth thought for a moment. And she raised a crooked finger. She said, "There is one thing that I would ask. When you leave this place, and when you talk about me to others, tell them I am young and beautiful.